What's up guys, DTwo from DTwoAOV.com here with an AIC 2019 preview for you. Now, unfortunately, there's not going to be an English broadcast of the event, or if there is, it doesn't involve either me or TJ. So that means that this is going to be a solo preview because if there's not going to be an English broadcast, then TJ has no interest in covering it. He's moving on to other games. Very understandable. So, I'm going to be talking about which teams to look out for coming into the end. But if you want to see for yourself who is good, who is strong, all that kind of stuff, then you can go over to DTwoAOV.com and see how they qualified. Basically, click on this over here, AIC qualifiers, and you'll get to see how each of the teams qualified. It's pretty straightforward this time. Basically, all the top leagues with a few invites here and there. But without further ado, let's get on to the actual covering of this. So it's going to be in Thailand, as this beautiful graphic shows here. The group stages are pretty soon. They start on November 5th. That's just next week. And going to be going on all week. And then they have the quarterfinals, which is the start of the elimination round. And then the semifinals and finals are going to be on the following weekend, November 23rd to 24th. Now, these are the groups. These were the countries and rankings that they put, or by rankings I mean, 1 and 2, that they put in for the groups. This was the drawing right after the AOG finished. I don't have the team names here, but we'll go over them in just a second. And then once we do get to the quarterfinals, it's going to be this kind of setup. Exact same thing as the AWC, so you should be pretty familiar with it by now. I guess the only other information here is that the top 4 teams from each group advance, which is pretty important. And obviously, the pairings are as you would expect them, right? A1 versus B4, B1 versus A4, all that kind of good stuff. So let's talk about what happened at the 2019 AWC, because when we talk about the international events, it's very instructive to go back and see what happened last time to see which teams are good coming into the event and whatnot. So, Taiwan, Vietnam, and Thailand were the top regions going into that event, based on 2018 AIC and other events. At this point we've had quite a few international events, so we're starting to get a feel for who are the best teams. But still, those are the top 3. They were the top 3. They still are the top 3, as we'll see. The group stages went mostly a form, except for the main Thailand team, which was TDC. They kind of screwed up a little bit and lost to China, and it hurt themselves because they fell to 4th in their groups, but it hurt Indonesia even more because Indonesia, even though they were a bit frisky and took a game off of some of the top teams, they fell in a 3-way tie. And then after that, the 2 Vietnamese teams managed to reach the semifinals. The Thailand Wildcard team managed to beat the Thailand main team. By that point, we kind of felt like they were playing better anyway. And that was HQ and Mad Team from Taiwan, who were the defending AIC 2018 champions at the time. They were the other semifinalists. And then from there, the main Vietnam team, aka Team Flash, as we'll see in a second, they came back from 3-1 down against the Thailand Wildcard team. And honestly, when you go back and watch that series, everyone remembers the finals, but if you go back to semifinals, like, Thailand Wildcard really should have won that. It's kind of crazy that Vietnam was able to come back and win that. And then in the finals, it was just a back and forth affair, 1-0, 1-1, 2, 1-2, 2-3, 2-3-3, and then finally Vietnam was able to finish it off in the end and dethrone the reigning champions. And for the first time, Vietnam won a world championship, and they were on home soil to boot. It was in Vietnam, so that was really cool to be there to witness. So that leads us to questions coming into the 2019 AIC. And the first and most obvious is, can Team Flash repeat as world champions? It's really funny because they're in a very similar situation to Mad Team in the 2019 AWC, because I feel like Team Flash, as you'll see in a second, and when I do the rankings, they are by far the favorite coming into this, in my opinion. So yeah, I think that it's one of those questions where, like, can we just see some team in the world win back to back? We haven't had it yet. We had AHQ slash Team Korea win the 2018 AWC. Prior to that, it was, I believe, at the time SMG, they won the 2017 AIC, but that was before any Western teams played in it. The 2018 AIC then flipped back over to Mad Team, and then it was obviously Vietnam. So we've never had a team win back-to-back, even though usually there is some sort of, heavy favorite going into each event, and Team Flash definitely are the favorites this time, and they have the swagger to go with it. The next question I have is, can HKA, aka Hong Kong Attitude, and One Team continue Taiwan's success in international competition? So One Team, this is it's funny because One Team actually was one of Taiwan's representatives at the 2019 AWC, but it was only because I felt like they kind of lucked their way into it. TXO, they kind of fell apart as they were qualifying, and that allowed One Team to get through. So I kind of felt like they were imposters, like they weren't actually Taiwan's second best team. But this season in the GCS, Mad Team kind of fell apart since Benny left and Wind went somewhere else. And then we had and then TXO didn't really do that well themselves either. And so we had One Team and HKA on top the entire time, and they're just not as strong a competitors as we've seen in the past from the likes of SMG and J Team and Mad Team and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like, and again, we'll see this in the rankings, I feel like Taiwan is definitely on the bottom of the big three, as it were, right? Thailand, Vietnam, and Taiwan. And HKA, and maybe HKA when One Team can prove me wrong, but I don't really have a lot of faith in them. It feels like the only reason why they're on top is because TXO and Mad Team kind of faltered. But you never know. They're definitely strong teams, so they could possibly surprise. Third question. Will one of the Thai teams finally break through? So the first time we actually had everyone properly together, and before we even know who was strong, I remember back in the 2018 AWC, it was kind of like, oh, well, China and Taiwan are the strongest, and then you don't really know with Korea, and then it was kind of like, well, maybe Thailand and Vietnam can be like a spoiler, right? Not for the championship, but just be a spoiler in general, or like a wildcard team essentially. And it's funny because I think part of that becomes from just bias, right? And it's a good bias. It's not a bad bias to have, right? Because traditionally in esports, the Southeast Asian countries have never been particularly that strong, particularly in MOBAs. So it was good to be dubious of them being actually good, even if they were showing some results here and there in the tournaments prior to that. But Thailand shocked everyone at the time, and they were one game away from being the world champions, and they narrowly lost to Korea. And from then they established themselves, or at least the region established themselves as one of the top three regions, obviously with Taiwan and Vietnam. But even though they've come in with really strong rosters, they've always just choked. And I mean, every single time they basically choked. In the 2018 EIC and the 2019 AWC, I would say that both times they didn't really lose because they were completely outplayed. They've definitely played better before, and it was just completely uncharacteristic of what I had seen from them in the past. It wasn't being out rotated. It was just making silly plays throughout the entire time. So it's one of those things where I do believe that Thailand still is one of the top regions, but the nerves have definitely gotten to them in the past. And now that they're on home soil, will that provide more angst, or will that propel them to the championship? Another question I have, let me get a drink real quick. Another question is, will Korea crash the party once more? So interesting sequence of events. Korea obviously won the AWC 2018 championship, and then they didn't have a league anymore. So prior to the 2018 AIC, they went to the GCS, right? They were basically a 5-man squad in the Garena Challenger Series, the Taiwanese league. but they they kind of screwed up the qualifier system for the AIC. Basically, it kind of rendered the entire playoffs moot because they stormed through the entire playoffs. And since the qualifiers were based on that, it means that the eventual qualifiers were just indicative of the regular season standings, right? Because nothing actually happened. Everyone just played against AHQ in the gauntlet style playoffs, and nothing really changed. They kind of screwed up the playoffs, and so they installed a rule where you have to have at least 3 players from the region in order to participate in the league, right? So that means that even if they were able to qualify from that region, they're still eligible to participate in international events. So after that, AHQ split up. Some went to TDC, someone stayed with AHQ, but they added Thai players, and then there was a third team like Workpoint Fighting Fish with like the subs of the AHQ. Basically, I think it was Pew and Chaser went there, and they joined the RPL, the Thai league. And after, and they actually, TDC and AHQ, the 2 teams with Korean members on them, they both managed to make it to the 2019 AWC, obviously. But after that, after TDC kind of faltered, they got rid of Sun and Jjock, and kind of they added other Thai players. They changed their name to KOG, Diamond Cobra, and then they didn't do well at all. They didn't even make the playoffs for the RPL. But HQ stayed together. So anyway, this is really long. I should just get on with it. The point is, HQ is still in. It has qualified for this, and they have 3 Thai players and 2 Korean players. But because Sun and Jjock were no longer in the RPL, they kind of just went back home and streamed and did all that kind of stuff. But they are now part of the Korea team. And they are Team Olympus. They basically the original name of AHQ when they participated at the 2018 AWC. So they are real wildcards, as we'll see in a moment, with 2 players who are former champions. It really obviously depends on the remaining 3 players, but as we've seen in the past, Jjock and Sun by themselves can carry a team to victory just because of their style of play, because they're both extremely aggressive and they kind of pull multiple members to the side of the map, and it really gives the other side the opportunity. Like, for instance, if Sun's pulling 2-3 members to his side of the map, then Jjock is being aggressive and he's taking advantage of the numbers advantage, and vice versa, right? The Sun can win any 1v1 that he plays against. So it's really interesting to see what Korea will be able to do, and if they can somehow manage to upend one of the top 3 regions. And then finally, just kind of confusion about the rest of the teams. What do we make of Indonesia, Europe, the Philippines, China, and Japan? And I won't talk about them now. I'll talk about them when we get into the teams, which is right now, I believe. Yes, right now. So I made a tier list, and these the names of each tier are the exact same, except for I added one more tier. It's the exact same as when I made the 2019 AWC preview. So, group stage fodder. These are teams who I expect to lose in the group stages. The only real way I see these teams getting out of groups is if they play well, obviously, but I think another team in their group has to falter, right? It has to be like a combination of things. So, starting off with Japan. Last time I had Japan ranked like unusually high. I had them like 10th instead of 12th. That's because they had a couple of Vietnamese players on the roster. This is, by the way, this USG team. They've changed names, but it's the exact same team, except for one player. I think one player is different, but they have, I believe, 2 Vietnamese players again, 3 Japanese players. So they're solid. One thing going for Japan is they finally have the basically the same number of heroes as the rest of the regions. They're only a couple of heroes off, and whereas going into the AWC they were like 20 heroes behind. So at least they'll be able to practice for an extended period of time before going there. So that should help them quite a bit. That then again, it's one of the things where you kind of have to prove it. And Japan other than like fighting games, they've never been very strong in esports in the first place. So one of those things where again they have to prove it to me before I can move them up. Next is Philippines, basically the same situation, right? They had to prove it to me that they're good. no one from the MSP, the Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines region, has ever done anything in international competition. And so unless they're able to prove that they, can get out of groups, like I'm going to keep selecting them to not make it out of groups until they do get out of groups, basically. And not to mention that they play on the Indonesia server now, so, it might be more difficult to kind of get in the practice that you want against certain teams. Next is Nova. And, I mean, one, the obvious reason is that, like, Europe has kind of been in and out of, like, they kind of been on the bubble anyway, right? They've kind of been, either barely make it out of groups or they barely fall out of groups. And because there are, 4 teams out of each group and 3 are basically already decided, because there's there's going to be at least 3 teams from, each of the 3 big countries, because there's 2 from each team, 2 from each region. That means that there's only 1 more slot, and unfortunately Europe gets the short stick. The other reason is that there was no league. There was no league, so even though Nova has been, historically strong, they, they're basically going from scratch. They're going from 0 to 60 or 0 to 100 in nothing flat, because there's not going to be any sort of practice. Not going to be any sort of or like, by practice I mean they're not going to be battle tested, right? It's going to have been a long time since they've played in actual games that count. And the last time that Nova was even in International Championship was last year's International Championship. So it's been a year since they've been on the world stage. Again, if you want to see who these teams are, you go to the article that I have. But it's basically the same suspects. I think it's like, off the top of my head, it's Darkbreaker, Grizzly Q, Ruiz, who they got from Queso, and then Poseidon, and I'm forgetting someone. Vex, right? All right, so moving on. These are the wildcards. I would say that China and Korea are definitely more wildcards than Indonesia. The only reason why I put Indonesia here is because in the AWC this year, they were really unpredictable. And I feel like they kind of took a while to get going. This EVOS esports team, has won 4 championships in a row. And I thought, they might be able to, parlay that into a good showing in the last championships, but they faltered earlier on, and it took them a while to really get going. But when they finally did, they took a game off of Vietnam. They were really starting to show what they could bring. So I think that, like, with that bit of experience under them, they can, show something this time and potentially upend one of the higher teams. One thing that's also going for them, I didn't mention this earlier, but it's different from before. Like, before, it was just a simple round robin against everyone, where they played 2 games, best of 2. So you just play 2 games against a team, play 2 games against the next team, etc., etc. This time, it's 1 game against everyone, but a double round robin. So it's basically the exact same thing, right? You play everyone the same amount of times in your group, but I think it does make a difference mentally, because for instance, if you're Indonesia, you really avoid potentially getting to a funk, right? Because you're in the middle of a series, you don't know what's going on, you don't know how to react. Like, maybe you lose your first game this time, and then you get to see what everyone else is doing, what the meta is, how people are reacting, all that kind of stuff, and then you can regroup for the next game. So I feel like it's more consistent, and that can help, like, a team like Indonesia that needs to get his feet under it. Or it could hurt it, because, the less randomness, the worse for the lower teams. So the next team we have is Team China. And this is really interesting because China was actually selected. I forgot to mention, China, Korea, and... hold on, let me go back. China, Korea, and Europe were all selected. Whereas... Japan, they won their qualifier. Philippines, they won their qualifier. And Indonesia, they won their ASL championship thingy. But anyway, back to Team China. I'm trying to look at their roster for a second. Go to DTwo.com. Who was it? It was Nanwan and Junjun. So Nanwan and Junjun were on the Chinese team at the 2018 AWC. Now, China has been getting steadily worse in each international championship, but that's partly because they've been selecting teams that were like lower and lower on the totem pole, or higher if you want to be like actually correct about it. But the point is that the first team they had at the 2018 AWC was a team that was like in the B tier. Like they were actually pretty good. They were like just off of the highest tier in China, and keep in mind that KOG in China is like bigger than League of Legends and Dota there. So like they're the top of the top. So just being in the B tier is like really, really good. And that team actually finished 4th at the 2018 AWC, and they were expected to do even better than that, right? Before, you know, Thailand shocked everyone and took them out. So what I'm trying to say is that the kind of mediocre Chinese teams that we've seen in the past 2 World Championships have been because they've taken not B teams but actually C teams, right? Like in a couple of championships in a row, it's been the C teams, not like actually the B teams. This time, I don't know who the rest of the roster is. It's AAA and Lily and Lanyu. I don't know who those people are. But Nanwan and Junjun were on the team that was really, really good a year and a half ago. Now, I don't know if it's the case that the world has gotten that much better. You know, there's a couple of things at play here. Obviously, we're taking, you know, there's a couple of things at play, to explain why China didn't do as well. One is obviously they're taking the C teams instead of the B teams, but the other thing is maybe the world just got better, right? And while, you know, China was trying to, and China obviously has a adjustment period going from KOG to AOV. But that said, you know, the Chinese team that was really good has, you know, those 2 members on it. Or sorry, the 2 members from that team are on this team, Nanwan and Junjun, and it's possible that the rest of their players are actually, you know, from the B tier teams as well. So it's possible that this team is really, really good in China. So, if you may be wondering why I have them 8th then and not 7th, if you know, I think that they have 2 of the 2 really good players in the AWC from 2018, and could definitely upend one of the top teams if indeed, you know, the world hasn't gotten that much better. The reason why is because Korea actually has 2 world champion players on its team, obviously in Sun and Jaejuk. Now, I don't really know much about the rest of the team, but those 2 by themselves obviously can make anything happen. So basically, Team AK and Team Olympus are in similar situation where, I don't. Okay, for Team AK, I'm not sure. Maybe the rest of the team is really good too. But we know for sure that Team AK and Team Olympus both have 2 very, very, very good players, and that could certainly carry them to like an upset win over the top teams. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too rambling for you guys. Let's move on to the dark horses. I have both Taiwan teams here. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't really have a whole lot of confidence in these 2 teams. I think that the reason why they were on top of the GCS was more so TXO and MAD underperforming than them actually being like really good. That said, HK had a really nice playoffs. They were obviously they actually, it was one team who was in first and Hong Kong Attitude in second going into the playoffs, and then Hong Kong Attitude had to win to get to the finals, and then they crushed one team in the finals 4-0. So Hong Kong Attitude, maybe I'm underestimating them. It's kind of one of those things where I'm treating them almost like a non-Big 3 region team because they haven't really proven anything to me, right? Like they've only beaten teams that were underperforming. And so in my eyes, like Taiwan just feels like the weakest of the Big 3 regions right now. That's why I have them here, but you never know. I don't really see one team shocking anyone. I still think they're the same team as they were, you know, at the AWC. But HK, maybe they make something crazy happen. We'll have to see. And next we have the contenders. In 4th, we have HTVC IGP Gaming. It's the longest acronym you've ever heard. Who is Vietnam's number 2. We have AHQ Thailand's number 2, and Burian United Esports Thailand number 1. Let's start with HTVC IGP Gaming. So, believe it or not, believe it or not, this team was actually first. Yeah, they finished first in the regular season, ahead of Team Flash. They had a dominant regular season, and obviously that's above teams like, for instance, the Box Gaming team. They actually finished 6th in the league. Like, AOG was an absolute bloodbath this time, and IGP Gaming, despite all that, was on top, like, by far. They barely edged out Team Flash, but other than that, they were ahead of everyone else by like leaps and bounds. So they were really, really good. They just ended up losing to Team Flash in the finals. The only reason why I have them 4th, like, just based on strength of region and performance in those particular regions, I would probably have IGP number 2 overall. Just have the 2 Vietnam teams number 1, have the 2 Thailand teams 3 and 4, and then etc. But the reason why I have them 4 is because I feel like AHQ has more like championship experience. Like, this is going to be IGP's first time at an international event. And this time, it's not going to be in Vietnam. It's going to be in Thailand. It's kind of funny. I really wanted to put HQ over Buriram, even though Buriram beat them. And they beat them like fairly handily too, 4-2 in the RPL finals. But the part of the reason why I have IGP 4th is because I wanted to have them under HQ, but I couldn't have HQ over Buriram. So this is how it turned out. You never know. IGP maybe just like absolutely crushes it. You never know. And we'll see what happens with them. But I would not be surprised in the slightest if IGP ends up being the second best team in the in the AIC. I would be surprised, however, if they beat Team Flash and won the championship. So HQ, they're the same team as last time. Obviously, last time going in, they had to work through a lot of stuff in the RPL to kind of figure out who they were. This time it was much smoother. They got into the playoffs nice and easy in the RPL. The RPL had like a top 4 and a bottom 4. It was really there really wasn't a whole lot of competition as far as like the playoffs themselves were concerned. But yeah, once they got to the playoffs, they crushed Bazaar, they crushed Evos, and they got to the finals, and they ended up losing to Buriram. So they showed their playoff medal. They showed that they're like championship material, and so that's why I have them pretty high. Next is Buriram, and Buriram, if you remember, I don't know if you watched the RPL or if you listened to my previous preview for the AWC, you remember that they were dominant in the regular season last season for the RPL Season 3. And they just completely just shat the bed in the playoffs and fell out of contention. And then I think, I don't know whose decision it was, but I think it was like obviously like the owners or managers or whoever. They started cutting players left and right before they started like making roster changes like directly before the next qualifier for the AWC, and that just made things worse. And they just completely bombed out of that as well. So they didn't even qualify after being so dominant the entire time. And it's just side note. It's like, I feel like whoever Buriram's owners are, they're just like completely impatient. They're like the New York Yankees, right? Just buying like every single player possible, because that's exactly what they did to try to get like every single top Thai player. But this time they were able to rectify their mistake. They finished again number 1 in the RPL in the regular season, and then they backed it up obviously by beating AHQ in the finals. Before that, they crushed Evos in the first round as well. So they showed that they put that all behind them. They have one of the best junglers in the league in the first one. Even going back to the last AWC, I was saying that first one was rival to Neil as one of the best junglers in the world. Now, obviously, there's ADC on Team Flash, but watch out for first one on Buriram. He's absolutely... Actually, now that I say that, I'm pretty sure they moved him to side lane. They did the same thing with Neil as well. They keep moving their best players to side lane. Anyway, the point is first one's really good. And last, and the opposite at least, in fact the most, is Team Flash. Not really a whole lot to say here. Again, like I mentioned earlier, they actually finished second in the regular season, but they had a really good record. They weren't close to falling below second place. Obviously, that meant they had to win one more round to get to the finals and qualify for the AIC. But it was smooth sailing, and it was so smooth, in fact, that they actually played. I forgot who it was. They played the guy that they didn't normally play. They played basically their sub. They played their sub in the semifinals, and then they played their normal starter in the finals. I don't know if that was just like styling on the other team. I don't think there was a styling on the other team in the semifinals, or if it was just like a tactical maneuver. But yeah, it was just ridiculous. They crushed the semifinals and they crushed the finals, and yeah, they just have that championship medal about them, and I would definitely be surprised. I actually want to see like who would actually beat them, but I feel like they have a different kind of swagger than Mad Team going into the previous AWC. So I don't know. I would be pretty surprised to see them falter. But obviously, it's never happened before, so I would actually be. I don't know. Nothing. I guess nothing would really surprise me, but it'd be interesting to see if they don't repeat who would actually beat them. All right. So with all that said, these are the actual groups. We saw the countries earlier. Now that we've seen the teams, this is how they're laid out. Kind of interesting that again, Group B is very, very top heavy with 1 and 2. But last time it was like 1, 2, 3, like 5, 7, 9 or something. Like it was ridiculous. This time is 1, 2, then a big drop to 6 if you consider one team that low, which I do, and then down to Team AKA or Team AK, and then Liab and USG. Whereas Group A, you have 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10. So if you look at this, based on the quote unquote big 3 regions, I would say that Group A, there's like a top 3 and a bottom 3. But like I mentioned before, I mean, there's a reason why I had Korea and EVOS as wildcard teams, because anything could happen. I think the big thing with Group A is if the non-Sun, non-JJack players of Team Olympus aren't up to snuff and they just underperform, then I could easily see EVOS taking that spot. EU, it's a harder road obviously because it had to beat both Korea and Indonesia, so it's gonna be a harder road for Nova, but it's certainly possible. It's not like they're unbeatable, those teams. And again, if Taiwan is not as good as I thought, or if Taiwan is not very good like I think they aren't, then maybe EU can snag a win off of them as well. I think it's going to be really hard to get games off of IGP or AHQ though, unless IGP just completely falters under the spotlight. So yeah, it's really up to Korea, honestly. Like Korea could just spoil the top 3 party because they have Sun and JJack, or by the way, Team Korea and the team with Koreans on it in Group A. I just realized that. So Korea could like spoil the top 3 party, or they could, if the other 3 players in them crap the bed, or if Sun makes a key mistake again like he did last time, then they could fall under Indonesia. So Korea is like again the real wild card there. As for Group B, Flash and Buriram, I just expect them to finish 1 and 2. I don't think there's any, and in that order as well. Like they're just kind of peerless in this group. Group B, instead of having a top 3 and a bottom 3, they have like a top 2 and a middle 2 and a bottom 2, in my opinion. And it's going to be really hard for Philippines or Japan to take out, either Team AK or one team in order to make it into the playoffs. And similarly, I really don't see one team or Team AK beating Team Flash or Buriram unless Team AK is like ridiculous, right? Like they brought all like the B tier teams from China, which I mean that as a compliment. If they brought all their B tier players instead of their C tier, then they could maybe do something. But I don't know. Team Flash and Buriram is just way too strong in my opinion. The only way I see anything weird happening is if again Buriram just like craps the bed once more. But even in previous World Championships, like them crapping the bed is like making the semifinals or at worst the quarterfinals, right? Like Thai teams, even when they play crappy, they still manage to like squeak their way out. So yeah, it's gonna be tough. So again, like I mentioned, a top 3 for Group A, for Group A, a top 3 and a bottom 3. For Group B, there's a top 2, middle 2, and bottom 2. Some people have been saying like Group B is the group of death. It's like, is it really though? Like they have Philippines and Japan there. Like it seems like the bottom 2 are just I mean, the top 4 are just going to make it, in my opinion, so I don't see what the problem is. And obviously, you're going to face, like, the bottom team from Group A, so it's like, it doesn't really matter. Like, if you're, for instance, if you're Buriram, like, it doesn't really matter if you face Team Flash in groups, because once you get out of groups, you're not going to face anyone as good as Team Flash in the first round, and probably not the second round either, right? Like, if you're Buriram, like, say you finish second, right? Then you know, if you go by the rankings of this, then you play against AHQ in the first round, right? You beat AHQ in the RPL, so you should beat them again. And then the second round, you play against the winner of, like, IGP and 1. Like, it's definitely not that hard of a road for Buriram to the finals if things go according to plan. So people saying, like, oh my god, Group B, they both Team Flash and Buriram, it's like, it's still fine for both of them, right? It's still, I could very easily see Team Flash and Buriram just meeting in the finals, just going chalk, right? And not having no issues at all. In fact, that probably would be my my prediction going into this. I'm not gonna make any actual predictions, but just like I mentioned, like the thing with Korea, where they could either go up or down. That's something to look out for. For Group B, let's start with Group B because it's easier. I think they actually finish. So Flash is 1, Buriram's 2, in my opinion. One team, they could lose to Team AK, but on average, I think they win. So I think it's just actually those rankings. I don't see Liab or USG spoiling that party. Group A is a lot closer. Like, again, like I was talking about with the rankings, Hong Kong Attitude, maybe they're better than I thought they were. They could definitely, like, I could, any of HQ, IGP, and Hong Kong Attitude, I could see any of those 3 finishing first, and any of them finishing second, any of them finishing third. And then I could see one of them potentially losing to Team Olympus as well. Like, there's a lot of variance in Group A. Like, I wouldn't be surprised to see I wouldn't be surprised to see Olympus, EVOS, or Nova make the playoffs. I would be surprised to see multiples of them make the playoffs. I think I would be the least surprised of the top 3. I'd be the least surprised to see HK fall out of the playoffs, though. It would be still pretty surprising, though. I would be flabbergasted if IGP or AHQ didn't get out of group stages. And then from there, like, you know, HK, IGP, and HQ are definitely very dangerous in the first round of the playoffs. Though I don't know if anyone can beat Flash. One of them might be able to beat Buriram, but whoever faces one team or the Chinese team, I feel like they should be able to get through them. So those are my kind of sort of half predictions. You kind of see where I'm heading here. I think that Flash is probably going to beat Buriram in the finals, and yeah, that's kind of it. I've been rambling for a long time. Don't know how to end this, but I'll just end it now. Please subscribe to the channel. Please go to DTwo.com, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.